Boa tarde a todos, todas, todes. Nessa última live do mês de dezembro do ano de 2024, nós primeiro gostaríamos de agradecer a todas as pessoas que estiveram aqui presentes assistindo e depois também assistiram à gravação do vídeo. Esse trabalho só é possível porque a gente tem sempre uma audiência, se não ao vivo, mas também depois. E a gente está fechando esse ano de 2024 não só com uma chave de ouro, mas uma chave toda cravejada de brilhantes. E porque hoje a gente vai receber a professora Paige Morahan. Ela foi e é, né, uma tutora do professor Waltz, como ele vai dizer mais adiante. E eu já aproveito, peço para que vocês deem like no nosso vídeo, se inscrevam no canal, porque a live de hoje eu tenho certeza que vai ser muito interessante e vai tirar todas as urucubacas da educação, da pesquisa na educação da saúde, que a gente possa ter. Professor Valdes, com você.
Muito obrigado, Lúcia. Boa tarde a todas e a todos. Eu vou introduzir a professora Paige Morahan. Thank you, Paige, for being with us. I will start introducing you in Portuguese and then I will do it in English and I'll pass the word to you. Muito obrigado por estar com a gente aqui hoje, ter aceito o nosso convite. Nós estamos concluindo esse ano, cujo tema foi e é a pesquisa na educação das profissões da saúde, e a Paige gentilmente aceitou nosso convite. A professora Paige Morahan é professora emérita de microbiologia e imunologia da Drexel University College of Medicine. Ela é fundadora do programa Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine. É um programa para mulheres, lideranças femininas na educação médica. Ela também é fundadora, foi co-diretora, consultora atualmente do Famer Institute, que muitos de nós tivemos o privilégio de vivenciar, de aprender, eu, inclusive, e especialmente, eu sou muito grato ao Famer. Ela já teve várias posições, chefe de departamento, ela foi professora, ela iniciou os programas de liderança, de educação médica, e tem premiações nacionais e internacionais, e a Paige, atualmente, ela atua, né? Ela está sempre em atividade, ela tem uma atividade como artista. E a gente queria divulgar aqui o Paige's Page Around the World. Depois ela vai falar um pouquinho para vocês. E ela faz calendários, ela tira fotos e coloca citações nas fotos. É um trabalho maravilhoso e toda a renda desse trabalho é para auxiliar as pessoas que participam do programa do Famer na Filadélfia, nos Estados Unidos, que tem desdobramentos em todo o mundo. Muito bom. Paige, now I will start in English. I was saying very few of what you have been done during this such a long time, helping people like myself. I used to say that you are my mentor. Since the first time I met you, we still keep in touch. When I need to refresh my ideas, I ask help and we talk. And it's a great pleasure to have you here with us today. I'm seeing that many of Famerians from Brazil are following now the live. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank you, Marcos, that will be with us for the conversation just after the presentation that Paige will do. Thank you very much. It's up to you, Paige.
Okay. And you're going to do the slides, Lucia? Yeah. So this is my journey from basic science to health professions, education, research. And there are three touchstones that are up at the top. Of course, if we start to the right, I started the ELAM program, Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine program, when I was head of faculty affairs at Drexel. And we're now coming on to our 30th year. This is to root women to leadership positions in medical, dental, public health, NIH, other organizations like that. Over on the left, ELAM led to being able to, the honor really, to help start the FAMER program with Bill Burdick, which is now about 25 years ago, and which is now known as the International FAMER Institute. And I know a number of Brazilians have attended that. And of course, I've had the pleasure to come down to Brazil for 10 years to work with the Brazil Institute. And in the middle is my newest venture, which is Pages Around the World, a play on my name. And that the next slide shows you more about that, I started this business to support FAMER, and you have the opportunity today to sign up to be on my VIP list and to support FAMER by clicking on that QR code. And by doing that, you can help vote for the theme for 2026 calendar. The previous 4 calendars have had the theme of joy, light, courage, and resilience, with quotes, images around the world and quotes about the topic. And then there'll also be a drawing for the 2025 calendar. So now let's get into the journey. Next slide, Alicia. So overall, I was in basic science from 1961 to the early 1990s. I started interferon research, now known as kind of biologic response modifiers, at NIH funding and other government funding. I had an RCDA. And then there was a transition period from 1982 to the early 1990s. I became a department chair in 1982 of microbiology and immunology at the Medical College of Pennsylvania, which was one of the first women's colleges in the United States. That led, during that chairmanship, kind of led to expanding interest. I discovered I was reading broader journals. I did some leadership development programs. We developed a PBL curriculum, and then I started a faculty affairs office, and then left the chairmanship to become faculty affairs associate dean. And then all of this led to an increasing focus on education from the early 1990s till now, a long time. Faculty affairs office, we did lots of activities, including refining the promotion tenure process, the faculty development activities, and that led also with faculty affairs started the ELAM program that I've already mentioned to you, and the FAMER co-founding. Now, just to quickly go into some details on these to show this transition. Next slide, Alicia. So basic science years, I started out with a BA in chemistry, an MS in biology, and a PhD in virology. So you can see it was totally basic science. And already mentioned the research focus. Research framework, the only one I ever learned during all of this time was randomized experimental. That was all there was in basic science research. So, and then I've already mentioned the funding highlights and the NIH research recognition, the Career Development Award. Next slide. The transition years, I realized that I was kind of an edge person, cross-disciplinary, because my research had as its targets bacteria, viruses, and cancers. So that was across the board. And then I also did live animal work and tissue culture work and molecular biology. A major clue in my transition years, and something I say to the rest of you all, is that I changed my reading. I used to pick up the Journal of Virology or the Journal of Immunology every month and read what was going on. And then I found that I was picking up broader journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, Medical the academic medicine. And I was putting aside the Journal of Virology and the Journal of Immunology until I had to write a grant. So that was a clue. I did, during my chairmanship, I did some management and leadership training at Harvard, the AAMC, and the American Council on Education. The latter one was particularly important because it got me out of medicine into seeing the broader view of higher education. And during this time as chair, I had the opportunity to help start, along with a team, the problem-based learning track and to start the Office of Faculty Affairs. So that was the transition years. Now let's go to the health profession education years. Alicia, okay. So I realized I needed education expertise to research and evaluate programs. So that led to collaborations and workshops and tutoring educational methods and organizational change methods. And the research funding changed from the government sources primarily to private sources. These are just a list of some of them. And the training I've mentioned, some of it included future search, appreciative inquiry, and Myers-Briggs type indicator. So now let's go into what some of the research that came out. So first, I want to make some disclaimers. I learned this from Michael Rowe when he talks about talks about artificial intelligence. He says, one, I am not a quantitative social science researcher, so I had to rely on collaborations and to value those collaborators. At the time I started health professions research, there was less focus on theoretical frameworks and theory. So I've had to get educated about those as I've gone along. And my focus has always been on practical studies rather than theory development. The theory has come kind of afterwards as we've developed programs. So there has been some theory. So I moved from experimental to qualitative mixed methods research. I already mentioned the focus on practical application and collaborative approaches. The key, I want to go into two areas, the key early studies, which were practical comparisons, and then evaluation research. So let's go into the key early studies. The next slide, Lucia, please. So this was one of the first early studies, which was published in 2001, there were several schools that had grants from NIH, the Women's Health, the Office of Women's Health. And the focus was to ensure success of women faculty. And so we were all National Centers of Excellence in Women's Health. And so we did a comparative study with the other centers, and we looked at what were the success factors, what were the difficulties, what were the strategies used to overcome difficulties, and what were recommendations for future programs. So this is the type of study I'm really sort of whetted my skills on in health professions education, and I still view it as very important, these types of comparative studies that one can then build on. Let's look at the next one. This was one that Famer fellows started from Africa. They wanted to look at accreditation of, this was not the Africa study. This was started 2 years into the Famer program. We had fellows from the first year, and these are on the left, Jose Cueto, Vanessa Birch, Norzilla Morahan, Bosade, Zalina Ismail, Wasim Jaffrey, Oluwumba. You can see several from Africa, but also from Asia and India, Mongolia, Argentina. We looked at the programs of accreditation in these 9 countries to compare them to the programs in the accreditation in the U.S. And this was a document analysis with document study with thematic analysis. And we found that most of them were relatively recent. These accreditation systems started in 1957 in India and then in 2001 in Malaysia. But the conclusion was that the accreditation systems were very similar to those in the developed world. So this was, I think, an important paper to show that where the West might think that these developing countries were not as far along, they were definitely just as far along in their accreditation systems. So the next comparative study was faculty affairs offices. I led this study when I was involved with a group on faculty affairs at the AAMC, that's the American Association of American Medical Colleges. This was the first survey of faculty development offices. It was published in 2002. And it was really relatively, so we did a survey. We looked at developed the core functions and then had a recommendation. Now, this shows the usefulness of these studies. And there was a follow-up study 10 years later that I was also part of. And a good colleague of mine, Roberta Sanino, was the head of it. We found that the 11 core functions, which were similar to the ones in 2000, but there was one new one, web communication, and I'm sure there'd be another one now, 10 years later. And the big finding was there were an increased number of Office of Faculty Affairs, and most of them had started in the last 15 years. So this shows how you can do status reports and then build on them. And then the final study in this area, Alicia, the next slide, was the career intentions of medical students trained in 6 sub-Saharan African countries. And this was a paper survey of 9 schools. We looked at specialty choices and their career factors and personal factors and personal immigration factors and retention factors and the recommendations. So that's a snapshot of 4 comparative studies and the usefulness that I feel they have for moving our field along. Now let's go to evaluation studies. Next slide. I'm not going to go into details on these. I have them there are additional slides in the slides that you'll get. These are 4 that I'm going to be talking about. The first was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and an additional consortium of schools and another private foundation. Excuse me. This was a longitudinal study. We looked at 2 cohorts of ELAM for 4 years. And we had 3 groups. We had women that were accepted in the ELAM program for those 2 years. We had ones that were not accepted into ELAM, and then we also had the third group was women who were in the AAMC database that were a comparable rank. So we had 3 groups. The ELAM was women who were accepted and were interested, we knew were interested in leadership. The second group was women that we knew were interested in leadership because they had applied. And the third group was women that were not in either of those groups because we eliminated those in the AAMC database. So people that might not be as interested in leadership. And the data source was a pre and a 4-year post questionnaire. We wanted to give time for leadership to develop. And we also had an interview guide. So we did some qualitative studies as well. There were 16 quantitative measures. 4 were administrative leadership attainment. Another was academic full professorship. And then there were several others. So that was that study. It was a pre-post. If we go over to the Sloan Foundation, the third column over, that was also a longitudinal study. It had 8 cohorts, and we followed them for 2 years. The 8 cohorts were 4 years of ELAM fellows and 4 years of ELATES fellows. ELATES is another program that I helped start that is for women in academic engineering, technology, basic science. And the participants, the data source were from the participants, as was the RWJ study. We did pre-test, an immediate post, and then a 2-year post. And we looked at self-confidence in this because after our RWJ study, we felt that this was the most important aspect. Did you feel confident in conducting these activities and competencies in finance, organizational development, community of practice, getting known by others, and in leadership development, in leadership competencies, to say. And then that was another longitudinal study. In FAMR, we took a different approach. We did a retro pre because of the challenge of getting fellows to do two surveys. And this study was published in 2023. It was a retro pre, so the questionnaire is retro pre. And this was done for 20 years in both the IFI and the FRIs. In addition, we also had project abstracts, a thematic analysis of those, and an annual project questionnaire. So there were over 30 cohorts in this. And the participants, again, it was participant responses. And the survey was the importance and competency, confidence in 4 areas: health profession, education, leadership and management, in research. So the NIH study was somewhat different. We looked at primarily the quantitative part was promotion rates to associate and full professor. And we had 4 cohorts. We had women who went to the AA, this is as I said, the Association of American Medical Colleges, career development programs. There's one for early career and there's one for mid-career. The second group was the ELAM group. Third group were non-participant women, and the fourth group was men. And these were from the same schools, the same degrees, and the same first-year appointment and rank. So we made them as identical as we could. And the data source was the AAMC database. So the time was attainment to associate and full professor rank. So you can see these different approaches. If we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the results and the data analysis. So we used ANCOVA's, ANOVA to a mixed effects descriptive statistics. For the NIH study, it was different. We used Kaplan-Meier survival curves. The results in all cases, the leadership group was different from others. In the NIH study, the career development participants were more likely to be promoted to associate professor within 10 years, and as likely as men and more likely than the non-participant women to be promoted to full professor in 10 years. Sloan Foundation, we showed the confidence increased during the program, and it was maintained over 2 years. And it was similar for both ELAM and ELATES, which was important to say that leadership can cross these areas from medicine to engineering, technology, basic science. With FAMER, all cohorts showed knowledge, and there was little change over the 20 years of the program. I do want to mention, I was focusing on the quantitative studies. I do want to mention that we had additional studies that were third. So we triangulated, we had questionnaires of the deans, we had interviews with participants in the RWGH study. With NIH, we had a questionnaire. We had interviews of those attending CDPs. With Sloan Foundation, we had a questionnaire of engineering school deans on mentoring and sponsorship. And in FAMER, we've had interviews with participants, and we've had interviews with leaders in their schools on perceptions. So I do believe it's important to get this kind of triangulated data. So now I think we're over to the next question, Lucia, I think, was what were some of the challenges. So there are 5 challenges. I think IRB complexities is one in doing these studies. And I think it's important to accept it's the cost of doing business, and it's important to build in the necessary infrastructure. And I do recommend in collaborative studies to have one institution be the primary IRB. Another challenge is the necessity to redesign studies. We had to redesign the Africa study, the comparative study, because of the reality of data collection. We discovered that most countries did not have the data this was at the time we did the study, in electronic form. And then I think another one is to accept the reality of response rates and to really shorten questionnaires and to give small incentives. In the US, there are funding issues. You really need to go to private foundations rather than NIH or NSF for most of these studies, and that means developing relationships. The next slide gives more. Peer reviewers are a problem. I've definitely had problems with papers being accepted because basic scientists just do not understand social science research. That you cannot show individual comments in public domain. That being prospectively randomized to a non-selected group would be unfair. And co-investigator issues, you really need, I've learned you need to redesign or adapt based on reality. Co-investigators have had illness, overcommitment, staff turnover, changes in life and career, because these studies are usually going on for 5 years. So my solutions are to cross-train people and work with graduate students or residents. I've done that several times, and I've learned a lot each time I've done it, along with spelling out early specific commitments. So my overall recommendation is to build a robust central core to manage the IRB requirements, coordinate and set goals, and hold people accountable, etc. So that's my overall recommendation. So now on to tips. Excuse me as I cough. I really stress the value, I believe, of practical comparative studies. I think they're more validity and credibility than a single case study. The importance of evaluation of any curriculum and the methodological considerations include co-investigators with quantitative and qualitative skills and value them. And I've certainly learned a lot about questionnaires. Basic scientists don't realize that a questionnaire takes as much time and work as developing an experimental procedure. And to be sure you have an adequate response rate and to do the psychometrics necessary or use a validated instrument. So that's my tips. And then we're on to future opportunities. And I think the next slide, I just want to put the next slide, Lucia, up to talk about just what are some future opportunities that I see for the FAMER community and the Brazil community. I think the FAMER community in Brazil could certainly be a national resource for practical comparative studies of many of the changes you're going through. Some examples are promotion guidelines for health professions education, medical education departments or offices, specific aspects of the curriculum. And then is there, the ultimate, of course, is there any effect on health of the community? So the value to the field of HPE, I feel, is to identify common features, challenges, success factors as models to build on. So I will close there and open it for questions from you all.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful start. We have people following, many Famarians, as I told you. In a minute, we'll share some comments and questions. Marcus, do you want to start?
Yes.
Any question, commentary?
Yes. So thank you very much, Professor Page. It was very wonderful to listen about your research. I have a question. Let's say we are analyzing an intervention, let's say a curriculum change. And then how can you do like a good follow-up study? Because you had your intervention, but after that, people have also another experience from another places. How can you say that that intervention was responsible for any success in the future? Do you have any suggestion, please?
This is always a challenge of a leadership program. It is, you know, there's always confounding factors that enter in. I remember it's a reality. You have to accept that reality. This is why we, in that study, the NIH study, we really tried to get the participants in their cohorts. They were from the same school, they were from the same area, and the same discipline, and they were made, assistant professor the same year. So we really tried to make them as identical as possible, so they were in the same environment of that particular school, because we knew, a school, MD Anderson, is going to be quite different from University of North Dakota, for instance. So I think that's about what we can do. I don't think you ever can say, prove 100% that your program made a difference. I think that's something you have to accept is a reality, that it's impossible to get rid of all these confounding factors. I do think the triangulation is important to do other people feel that there was a difference. That was why we did the interviews did the survey in the Robert Wood Johnson with the medical school deans and dental school deans. Did they see a difference? And they did.
Okay, thank you. Another question that is a little related is the definition of leadership. I think the definition of leadership can change like over countries. Like how can you define, like, is it possible to have like a common outcome that you can compare like over countries or over institutions?
Not quite sure what you mean by we define leadership as getting people together to work on a common goal with success. So it's a collaborative approach. It's not the autocratic captain of the ship. So that's the way Famer defines leadership. Your other question was?
No, I think it was about a definition of leadership. Now, like you have like a broader definition. Like it's not like just like if you got like a specific position. It's more about like how you lead.
Oh, well, that's why we've had several indicators. in the first study we did, the Robert Johnson study, we looked at 11, I don't know, I forget how many factors it was, but one was academic promotion. Another one was administrative position. Another one was increased interest in leadership. Did they go for an MBA, for instance, or in your case, going for a PhD in education? Were they, interested in getting additional credentials? So I think those are, you need to do a variety. It's not just competencies. I think confidence in conducting various competencies like strategic finance in the U.S., that's going to be important for any leader. But getting a group together is going to be another important competence. So building a community of practice. So I think in each of these studies, we had a fair amount of thought on what were going to be the competencies factors that we looked at in the questionnaires. That was
okay. Thank you. And what sometimes I see in Brazil, like the leadership programs, usually they are for the profession, like after you finish your graduation or after you did your residence. Have you seen some studies that start looking like some like a earlier intervention, let's say to start leadership program doing the undergraduation course? Like,
you mean having follow-up?
Yes, but instead of starting the leadership program later, you could start it literally like before, like.
Yeah, I know Brazil has an initiative in that area with starting with students. There's been some activity. I think it's a great idea because it's like you go to medical school or dental school and you learn all this science, but you don't learn the business of doing it. So I do think it's useful to. I forget in Africa. Like in Africa, often a graduate will be in charge of a whole clinic, and they have no managerial experience at all. So I think it is useful to have something like that. It's so I'm a believer in it, but not all. Some schools have it, but not. I wouldn't say it was a trend yet, a majority trend, because they're still focused. It's like art school. They focus on developing the artistic skills, but not on how do you make a living as an artist.
Okay, now, we have some questions from the audience, people that are following us. Lucia will share. I will translate it.
Okay.
Elzenir is asking about in her perception, the studies in medical education, in the methodology, you have a kind of sometimes very short description. And I add to that the importance of the theoretical framework to design a very adequate methodology for studies in health professions education. Could you comment on that, please?
That has, in my time, I've seen that increase in importance, the frameworks and the theoretical background. As I said, it wasn't that important when I started the comparative studies. Now I definitely would go to the literature and look for a theoretical framework that I felt, our study fit. So that's, I think, so I'm just in agreement with Elzenir on that topic. I don't know, does that answer your question? I think it might not have been needed 20 years ago, but it is now.
Okay.
Which shows we've advanced as a field.
Yes, that's it. We have another one, Professor Troncon. You can read.
I think a big one, Troncone, is how do you do things with less resources? I think that's a big one. I will never forget a paper that trying to remember his name right now. Our fellow from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He was he was a surgeon, and he wrote some papers about using fishing line for sutures, because when you took a new fishing line out of its package, it was sterile, and as a when you needed to in his area, and using car lights to highlight a surgical field when you there really are important things that on adaptations that that developing countries can teach us. So Troncone, I think that's definitely an area. Another area is we're all dealing with the need of how do we build community among students, have them feel respected with disparate backgrounds. In the U.S., can be first generation college students who are very different from ones who've gone to college before, as well as all your ethnic backgrounds, all your religious backgrounds. And each country has this in different regards. And I think there's a lot of wisdom that we can share with each other that could educate other countries.
Okay. I would add the community-based education, our experience in FAMER, and the use of SUS, the Unified Health System in Brazil, as a place for training. I remember that this was not so familiar for many of my colleagues during the FAMER Institute due to the different context, the way the health is organized, and it was great to learn from them and to share the experience. And now we are trying this live, and this series is related to increase the awareness and the skills for Brazilians to try to publish their experience and share with the world. And with this, I will ask you a topic, because I'm interested in that, the idea of to increase the diversity of voice in health professions education. I know that you have been working and helping to decrease this difference for many years,
right.
But now it's really it's a hot topic. Right. We see publications, the global north, the global south. We consume experience that may not relate to our reality in the South, because more than 80% of all the publications in health professions education comes from the North, right. The developed countries. Right. I'd like to hear from you your perception, because what we're doing here is try to increase the interest and awareness from people who has much to contribute.
Right. Zareen Zaidi is the colleague I keep up with the most. She's a FAMER fellow now in the U.S. She's just been part of a study that involved a number of FAMER fellows talking about tips for increasing publications from the global south. I don't know whether I've sent that to you or not, Valdez.
Yeah.
I think that this is one reason I am recommending comparative studies rather than case studies, because I think that will add more credibility if you can do national studies in Brazil of different kinds of schools. You've got the private and the public. You have the new schools. What are if you take any topic you want to take, there's there's definitely can be some good research that would contribute. And I think those would be more likely to be published than a case study. So that's one reason I'm pushing those.
We have a comment and question here from Henry, who is also following us.
Oh, hi, Henry. Henry, I certainly agree that we need to have more research that gets to how do we actually determine that an intervention that we make has an impact on healthcare. And Marcos, this is just as difficult to measure as the impact of a leadership program. However, there are times that you can measure it. I'm thinking of 2 studies that Famer Fellows started. One was in Pakistan to measure the extent of anemia in women and to educate them about proper diet and ways. And this one was able to measure, was there an impact, this educational program, was there an impact on the level of anemia? So that's one where you can look. Another one I'm thinking was one in Cameroon, where we had the nursing school where the Famer project involved doing needle sticks to look at sugar levels for diagnosis of diabetes, and that also showed was able to have a direct impact on the number of people who got treated. Those are the 2 that I'm thinking of right at the most, but I think there are a number of them. I'm thinking of one that was not Famer just recently, that using artificial intelligence fetal monitoring systems decreased the preemie mortality rate in a maternal hospital in Africa. I'm trying to remember what country it was right now, by 82%. That's pretty dramatic by using that was a clinical intervention. But
good. We have another question. People are very interactive today.
Hi, Vera.
How do you believe you can strengthen research with different professional categories and improve health indicators? This is another hot topic, the interprofessional interaction and education. Thank you, Vera.
Yeah, interprofessional. Because I agree that for improving health indicators, you really are going to need to have interprofessional work. I'm thinking of the study for the nursing. It was taking nursing students, it was changing the curriculum, it was using the clinics with the staff in the clinics. So, so it definitely involved different people. I think one is this comes back to, I think, to project management, really making sure there is something in it for all players that is going to be useful for them, either in reputation or learning or community, doing something new. I think I come back, Vera, to really focusing on the leadership and project management aspects of it as you form the topic. Yeah.
Okay, we have another one from Mehi. Thoughts on how may AI influence health professions education and leadership programs?
I think it's going to affect it a great deal, Henry. We've had 2 sessions in Famer Connect on artificial intelligence that Michael Rowe has done they're available for reviewing if you want to, if you're, people are on Fame or Connect. If not, I'm sure that, Valdez, you could get hold of them and show it to Marcos, for instance. I think those are very good summaries. I took a 4-session course with Michael Rowe in the fall on general and on teaching and assessment and on clinical activities and research. And it is amazing what these programs can do in research. So to focus on research, and I think it would be useful to have a session with Michael Rowe on that for your group that's interested in research. There are programs now, platforms I reckon is the word I should use, that can analyze, say you go through the literature and you find 10 articles, and it will take you a long time to go through them and analyze them yourself. You can put them into an AI platform and get an initial, what are the major points that are coming out? What are maybe some lacks, gaps? So I think it can be very helpful. Also can be useful in brainstorming research ideas. Michael showed that. I use it primarily for writing right now, but I used it to help organize this talk. So I use the platform Claude as an open disclosure to people. So it helped me in organizing this. But definitely it will change things, Henry, and we need to be at the table and be part of the change and not let it be made at us. And so that's why I think keeping in contact with people like Michael Rowe is going to be very important. Marcos, you had a question?
No, I think AI will change, but I think one problem, I'll not say a problem, but a challenge. I think people are using a lot AI without doing research before. So for you to change how you teach, how you assess, you need to assess if the tool, if the AI is working better or not. So don't you think you are moving a little faster than we needed?
It's moving, the field is moving very fast, and I'm afraid that we have to move with it. Unfortunately, much of the literature, when it's published, because we have these long review processes, is really out of date. There were papers that said, that you have hallucinations, and yes, you did, but that's now been fixed with the newer platforms. So I do think that you want to use AI primarily as an assistant, as a peer assistant, not something you rely on. I would respect what Valdez said, but I would still, look at what I thought as well. So I think to look at not as an expert, but as a peer working with you side by side. It is going to lead to a change in assessment. We're going to need to move away from, I think clearly essays for knowledge we're going to need to move away from that. What Michael recommends, and I think it's a very good one, is to have students do micro projects to improve something, and to use AI in that area. Okay.
Interesting.
And yeah.
Because I see also two concerns about AI. One is the ethical part, because the students, the learners, they need to sometimes do the work by themselves, but with AI, just AI can do it. And another one is bias. We kind of have sometimes a biased language in the internet or in the database, so AI can continue with this bias.
Yeah.
So
I think to me, that's a big area of research, Marcos, is the bias. Because yes, the AI, the major algorithms were developed by the Northern Hemisphere and primarily by white men. Let's just be honest. So you have that bias. So that's why I do think that studies comparing AI perspectives are going to be very important. I think this is going to be a major area of research in the future.
I think we still have time for one more question. Francisco Arcego, how to deal? You know Francisco also? He's a famer from Rio Grande do Sul. How to deal with the political scenario in the United States, where it's said that universities are the enemy.
Yeah.
We were talking about this in the beginning.
Right. And I
Need
think
resilience.
Right. And I think, you all have been through that as well. We've been through it and we're now going back into it. It's a matter of being brave. And I'm not sure how many colleges are being brave. It also is, I think we need to go back to what the African Americans taught us about doing things kind of, I forget what the term is, but underground, where you do things and don't maybe not announce it that you're doing. Like I feel like DEI, of course, is now a bad word, diversity, equity, and inclusion. However, you can do much of that by not calling it that. So I think we're going to have to learn these devious ways to survive. We need to go underground. So Francisco, I'm sorry. I think that's the way most of us are feeling for at least the next 2 years.
As I told you, we are together, hands on hands, all the time. And I'd like to ask you, related to this and all, when I started to understand better education, health professions education, you said this word here, and I'd like to comment on that. The strength, the power of building communities of practice. Mm-hmm. Because this is, I feel that is a way of growing, finding support, and developing and amplifying your own ideas. As you said, we can do a study comparing US, Africa, Asia. It's due to the possibility to have a community of practice, people with common interests that work together and support each other. We are in the end of our wonderful life. I'd like to comment on that, please.
Yeah. I certainly agree on communities of practice. Each of these large studies that I've been a part of have been a community of practice where I've learned from the other co-investigators. And so I think it's very important to develop skills of building a community and also accountability practices to hold people accountable for getting their task done to get the grant deliverables done, or the project deliverables done. That's another area, by the way, where I'm following Michael Rowe. Has about 4 blogs out now on developing accountability partnerships and ways to have them work. Okay. So I think it definitely community of practice with accountability.
Great. And I'm sure that we need to keep in contact with Michael. Wonderful resource, this guy. We invite him for the next year.
We need to invite him for the next year. Yeah.
We will do that, Paige.
Well,
and I will tell you to follow.
Invite me for that session because I always love to hear it.
Oh, done. You will be part of the table to interact with Michael. Perfect.
But I do encourage all of you who are listening from Brazil, do look at Famer Connect, because we have we have 4 sessions a year for the whole thing. We've had 2 on, we had 2 initially by Kevin Eva on publishing. Then we had 2 by Michael Rowe on AI. We have scheduled 2 coming up shortly on open source materials, which would be, I think, helpful for all of us. So you in Brazil, don't get left out of the resources in FAMER Connect.
Oh, we're not. We'll be there. Okay, I think we are in our time. I'd like to thank you, all the people that have been with us in the last 60 minutes. It blows. It was great. I'd like to thank you to Marcos, Lucia, who is always with us. Lucia make everything happen from the beginning to the end. Thank you. And I wish to all of you wonderful Christmas, Happy New Year. And I pass to you, Paige, for your final words. Thank you again.
And I'll follow up by sending all the references for the 4 major studies.
Perfect. Thank you. Lucia, you can finish Português, if you want.
Só agradecer novamente as pessoas que estiveram aqui. Thank you so much, Professor Page. People are congratulating you and your talk. A professora Aparecida Maria Fontes está falando que a gente está terminando o ano with high notes, e é verdade. Só para terminar, nós vamos colocar na descrição desse vídeo um link para o questionário, para vocês dizerem para nós quais temas vocês gostariam de assistir aqui nas nossas lives. Vai ser importante para nós organizarmos a nossa programação do ano que vem.
Okay. Thank you, Paige.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.